So this is session 4 of Kingdom Come. And following on from yesterday, looking at the destruction of Jerusalem, this was not just a historical event where a great power, Rome, got sick of this little nation of the Jews and overthrew them. This was an act of God. If we read the Jewish historian Josephus, he tells of many portents before this happened. They're ones that come from God. One of the more amazing ones was, it's recorded by Josephus, and he states himself that it was so bizarre that it could be seen as perhaps fantasy, except that many people saw it. What it was is he described that at sunset there were chariots and troops of soldiers in armour who were seen in the clouds and around the cities. Sounds a little bit like the time in Dothan where the king of Aram surrounded the city to try and capture the prophet Elisha. Elisha's servant was terrified when he saw them, but Elisha prayed that God would open his eyes, and when he did, the servant saw that around the king's army, all in the hills around them, were horses and chariots of fire. Another account of the priests, they were going this is time of Pentecost, they were going into the temple in the evening to do their duties, and they felt a quake, and then they heard this huge noise, and finally they heard the words, "Let us remove hence." This makes us think of the time of Ezekiel's vision, where Ezekiel had a vision of the presence of God actually leaving the temple. And he was leaving because the people had been so unfaithful and so disobedient. You can find that story in Ezekiel 10. Now we know, of course, that God restored his presence to the temple at a later time. But this withdrawal was a punishment on the people for their disobedience. In the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 23, verse 37, we read this, Jesus lamenting over Jerusalem. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often have I longed to gather you, your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate." Now we're very happy to see Jesus weeping over the stubbornness and disobedience of the people of Jerusalem. And we tend to just skip over that last little bit. Their house is being left desolate. The truth is that Jesus knew that the presence of God was going to leave the temple and leave the city. This was a momentous event in God's history. For the Jews, it was the end of what we might call the Jewish times. It was indeed the end of an age. A new age began where Jesus becomes the presence of God on earth in the presence of his followers. The temple was no longer God's dwelling place. The city of Jerusalem was no longer his capital. This wasn't just the story of a mighty power overpowering a little nation. This was God's doing. It was the end of an era. Even the historian Josephus was trying to encourage the people that this was God's punishment and that they shouldn't resist Rome because if it's God's punishment, there is nothing they're going to be able to do. It raises the questions about our church and our own lives. Are we living obediently? Or have we strayed so far that we're in danger of losing the presence of God?
Majesty, worship his majesty. Unto Jesus be all glory, power, and praise. Majesty, kingdom authority, flows from his throne unto his own is under raise. So exalt, lift up on high the name of Jesus. Magnify, God glorify, Christ Jesus the King.